Good afternoon. I'm Brian Rogers, and welcome to Banco Espírito Santos's Roadshow Wrap-Up. In the studio today with us, we have our head of Polish equity research. His name is Maciej Hebda. Maciej and I have just completed a roadshow where we visited investors in Kansas City, in Denver, Minneapolis, and San Francisco. Now we're back here in New York. Very excited to have Maciej with us here in the office today. So without further ado, let's get right down to it, Maciej.
Sure. Hi.
So first off, Maciej, thanks for joining us here this afternoon.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. Let's talk a little bit about the market. Can you tell us, you cover utilities primarily.
Exactly.
How would you position a portfolio right now in utilities in Poland?
We basically have a buy idea for distribution-oriented utilities, while we would be selling generation-oriented stocks. It's more of a macro call, more of a fundamental long-term idea. The key driver behind selling the generation-oriented stocks is basically that they are geared to the level of power prices, which we see going down, driven by unfavorable macro. So basically, cheap thermal coal, first of all, second of all, cheap carbon, and third of all, weak demand in Europe, weak demand for electricity, given the economic situation in Europe.
Right. So do you see that changing in the near term, or what do the forward curves look like regarding future usage?
I mean, basically, looking at German power prices, which are basically a proxy to the Western European markets, we see power price forwards at about 48 euros per megawatt hours for the next 3 to 4 years, which means that the market isn't expecting any growth in power prices. Virtually no growth in demand. So I would say that the macro environment would be quite unfavorable for generation-oriented utilities, and you would be looking at negative earnings dynamics for another 2 or 3 years.
Gotcha, understood. So speaking of your German, the German peers, compare, if you would, the Polish utilities with some of its European peers in terms of leverage, in terms of multiples, in terms of dividends, things like that.
Sure. Basically, first of all, the Polish or the Central Eastern European utilities have been trading at a discount to European or to German peers, and that's not changing. So basically, on PE or EV/EBITDA multiples, you're looking at a 20+% discount, which is basically, I think it's driven by the fact that the Polish utilities are facing some capex programs. So you're looking at growing leverage going forward. The balance sheet situation might be a bit more demanding in the next years, but we still argue that it's not a major risk. Earnings dynamics should be quite attractive for the distribution-oriented stocks given the regulations. And the dividend yields should be looking more and more attractive in Poland compared to Western European peers.
Right.
The Western European utilities are in the phase of deleveraging. The net debt to EBITDA ratio is well above 3. So we think that the dividends might not be as attractive going forward. While in Poland, the leverage is still quite low. The governments, both the Polish and the Czech government, will need the money, so they will be voting for higher dividends.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Your top pick in the utility space in Poland is Tauron. Can you tell me why?
Sure. Basically, first of all, it's a distribution-oriented utility. So 60% of EBITDA comes from regulated distribution, which we see as low-risk earnings profile. That's one thing. On top of that, we argue that some of the parts looks really attractive. I mean, if we value their mining assets at zero, if we value their generation fleet, which is quite old and inefficient, at zero, we're still left with at least a 20% upside to the current market price. The dividend yield is 6-7% this year and next year, which we also see as attractive levels. And the stock has underperformed the market significantly this year. We think it's not justified. I mean, it's not the same as a generation-oriented stock. It's a bit of a safer exposure. We see it as a deep value play.
Gotcha. Let's talk a little bit about some of your conviction ideas in Central Eastern Europe. The product that we produce here at Espírito Santos is called Silver Bullets. tell me a little bit about your silver bullet high conviction ideas right now.
Sure. We basically just published our 3Q12 silver bullets with 6 buy and sell conviction ideas. Utilities aside, because 2 of those ideas are for utilities, I would highlight PZU, which is our conviction buy. It's the largest insurance company in the region. Mm-hmm. It's trading at a discount to the Polish banks. That's one thing. It's trading at a discount to the Western European insurance companies, while you do have completely different exposure. I mean, PZU has absolutely zero exposure to Spain or Italy or Greece in terms of their bond portfolio. It's mostly Polish government bonds, mm-hmm. which we perceive as sort of a safe haven compared to some of the Eurozone countries. The dividend yields are quite attractive. We expect 9-10% yields over the next few years because of the excess capital that might be paid out. Mm-hmm. The earning dynamics is there. The stock has outperformed the market, and we believe it will continue.
Great. As we sort of wrap up here, let's talk briefly about Poland in general. What can you tell me about the consumer? What can you tell me about industrial demand right now, or the PMI data? And maybe a little bit, if you want to talk about the government, what's your views on the government? Are they helping things right now, making things worse? What's the government situation?
Sure. So maybe just starting with the GDP dynamics, comparing it to Western Europe. GDP in Poland last year, it grew by 4.2%. This mm-hmm. year, we would expect around 3%. Probably, given the PMIs and the industrial output numbers which came out recently, they're not so good, so we might be facing some slowdown in the second half of this year or next year. Mm-hmm. But I would still see growth in the range of 2-3% a year, which mm-hmm. is much more attractive than in Western Europe.
Sure.
In terms of the driving forces of the economy, I would say it's the consumer. We have a 40 million people internal market, quite strong. Consumer is still not as leveraged as in Europe in terms of mortgages or consumer finance. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot of potential there. The earnings power is growing, so there's an interesting convergence story, I would say, which we see as a long-term occurrence. And in terms of the government, they've been quite active in trying to maintain a low budget deficit at around 3% of mm-hmm. GDP. Basically, the privatization is one of the big issues right now in Poland. Mm-hmm. That's one of the ways to support the budget. The state has been selling down their stakes in the largest financials, utilities, mining stocks, chemical industry. Mm-hmm. So I believe that also would be some interesting angle for international investors to get exposure to Poland in the coming years.
Gotcha. One final question. You met a number of institutional investors on this roadshow. What was your impression of what U.S.-based investors are thinking about Poland? What's your impression about how they feel about the country, what their attitudes are about utilities, mining in general? What's your takeaway from this roadshow?
I think that Poland is actually it starts to be perceived as sort of a safe haven if you compare it to Western Europe, mm-hmm. which I believe is unusual. I mean, Poland is still an emerging market, but given the GDP levels, given growth, it's sort of moving to the developed market basket. So mm-hmm. The investors already noticed that. I think they do see the risk levels much lower than the rest of the emerging markets, not to mention the frontier markets.
Right.
The key risk, I would say, is quite low liquidity of the Polish stock exchange compared to other markets. I mean, daily trading volumes are $300 to $400 million a day. Mm-hmm. So for the US-based investors, I would say that there's maybe 10 to 20 investable stocks in Poland. So that might be a limited base.
Gotcha. Okay. Listen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. If I can help answer any questions about Poland, put you on the phone with Maciej, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to do so. Or reach out to my colleagues, Joy Bahasa or Purva Upadhyaya. If I can help with anything else, please let us know here at Espirito Santos. Thank you very much for your time.